Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Fine podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Telegram, and Facebook. And you can support the channel on Subscribestar, Locals, and Buy Me a Coffee. So while we wait for some people to join, today's episode is a overview of where the online right is today, broadly in three sections. One, a brief overview of the history of the online right, a description of where they're at now, and then a description of where they fall short. I will not be discussing what they could do or should do. That might be for a later video. This is mostly just where they're at now, where I think they're weak, and anybody can use that to improve their game. So here we go. The state of the online right in 2025. The online right, which has gone by many names over the years, from the alt-right, the new right, and the dissident right, has existed since 2007, with Mencius Moldbug's blog on qualified reservations, and various red pill blogs as well. I first encountered the online right after college in 2011. At that time, the movement had grown to include three broad camps: neo-reactionaries, the manosphere, and the race realist camps. Neo-reactionary seemed to me right out of the gate to be suspicious. Kind of microwaved libertarianism that was gussied up with some edgelord veneer. Rooted in the right libertarianism of Hans Hermann Hoppe, it served as a spoiling effort to retrench disenfranchised men into the capitalist system. Manosphere topics were, in my mind, self-evidently authentic, at least on paper. Society was rigged against men, and they needed guidance in navigating late-stage modernity. Unfortunately, this very real issue was diluted and misdirected with legions of grifters looking to make a quick buck. Manosphere types like neo-reactionaries retrenched disenfranchised men into capitalism, as if capital's drive to lower costs of labor wasn't the prime cause behind feminism. The race realist right also, on the surface, seemed organic, as it dealt with issues of how society and enforcing a colorblind schema onto white men set up systems of privilege for minorities that adversely affected white men. Then, as with the manosphere, grifters, and worse, spooks, diluted the movement. We can call these years from 2007 to 2013 the formative years of the online right. The years of crisis for the online right stretch from 2013 to 2020, where all of these movements lose a significant amount of steam and or are eliminated entirely. Moldbug's last year of major content production on unqualified reservations was in 2013, though his last post was in 2016. By that time, he had moved on. A small ecosystem of neo-reactionary ghost dancers existed afterward in an effort to keep the flame alive, but ultimately little happened. Then the moment of crisis came in 2017 with the Charlottesville, where the online right got savaged in real life. Two major things happened. Channels were deplatformed on YouTube, and Twitter accounts were suspended. This ushered in the age of doxing right-wing voices. The spook angle undid the race realist movement. For example, Jason Kessler, who was a key organizer of the Unite the Right rally, had been on Occupy Wall Street back in the day, which would have been 6 years earlier. This kind of flip-flopping is indicative of ulterior and suspicious motives. Not only were arrests made of right-wing activists, but against this ushered in the age of doxing. Many manosphere types were while not present at the Unite the Right rally, were also deplatformed as well as part of the broader dragnet. At this time, many of the grifters, having waxed fat on the donations of rubes, quietly ducked out. The temperature was getting too hot in the room, boys. The years of limbo from 2020 to 2025, we reach peak liberal authoritarianism with the Biden-era COVID lockdowns and more pressure on the right. 2021 was another bad year for the right, the Jan 6 incident. Many online right-wing thinkers were trying to rebrand, find new angles to work, ever grifting, and dealing with the fallout. In one sense, the stew of neo-reaction, red pill, and race realism created a baseline of aware right-wing men who accepted the core tenets as self-evident. In that sense, the movements constituted a consciousness-raising moment. The problem is that this is a mixed bag. While it's certainly true that the system was targeting men and whites in order to control them, The reasons for doing so were often misattributed. While the system used women and racial minorities to hold white men down, it would be giving both groups far too much credit to argue that they were the conspirators. They were dupes, patsies, and useful idiots, to be sure, but they were not the man behind the curtain. The basic reality is that many contemporary online right content creators are either stuck grinding the grift to stay relevant and pay bills, or else struggling to adapt to this new ecosystem, ever at risk of being subsumed in the broader Trumpist movement. After all, it went so well in 2021, why not do it again? The major problem for the online right today, and really since its inception, is this. It looks at economic problems and sees them as social problems. Okay, that right there, that's the TLDR for the rest of this talk. Let's look at immigration. Immigration exists because large mega corporations actively import these workers into the United States from the third world in order to suppress the cost of labor. Undocumented workers are best of all, as they are not protected by the same labor laws as other U.S. workers. This movement of persons is defended by policy think tanks on the right that are, quote, free market, and on the left that are, quote, inclusive based, facilitated by NGOs and U.S. officials historically looked the other way because of bribes from these corporate firms. This is the problem. This is why the U.S. is being invaded. Money. Sure, the Democratic Party has betrayed its principles of working class politics for the bowl of pottage that is temporary electoral success. Sure, academics virtue signal that they are not racist. Sure, multiculturalism creates unresolvable ethnic tensions, but none of these are driving factors. This is the case of the tail wagging the dog. Even if the online right got its Christmas wish list and defeated the Dems, the academics, and drove the immigrants out, this could all happen again, as the major corporate interests and old money families are still in power in the U.S. and sooner or later would try to assert their business interests, as they did, unraveling the FDR-era economic reforms beginning in the 80s. That the right cannot or will not see this is their Achilles heel. They are so in love with the grift and penny pinching that they cannot even conceive of this threat landscape, let alone act in it. Partly this is the libertarian origins of much of the space. Old ideas go down hard. Partly the grift makes money. This is what Marxists and communists talked about, a false consciousness. These men failed to see their actual position in society in terms of economic classes, and that they have failed to achieve a level of class consciousness necessary to even identify the problems. The neo-reactionary line that men placed higher up in the economic hierarchy than you are somehow aristocrats was a sick joke in the best of times. These men are fat and lazy grifters who could never tilt an attorney. If you wait for the boss to raise your pay, you'll be waiting till Judgment Day. When pressed, you get a lot of mealy-mouthed remarks about needing to make a living. Well, duh, but brown-nosing isn't the way to do it. We know diversity is used to break up unions. Just look at the Whole Foods heat map. We know this works at raising wages for workers. But why does the right fight this? I doubt they know themselves. A major reason why this is the cause of failure to learn from Carlyle about the cash nexus. The cash nexus is the concept that all social relations become mediated by cash exchange in a capitalist society. This idea was picked up on by Engels and Marx, who made proper attribution in their works, but is little known outside of far-left circles. The irony is that this is a reactionary idea rooted in the thought of Thomas Carlyle, who famously called economics the dismal science. For example, let's envision four social structures: the family, the church, the government, and business. In a properly ordered society, the social relation in each respectively is the love of storge, the love of agape, justice, and commerce. Only in the latter does cash exchange, by definition, predominate. The end goal of capitalism is to replace all these relations with cash exchange so that family, church, and government become functionally indistinguishable from business. The thing is what a thing does. Yet each of these enumerated social relations have a vested interest in not saying the quiet part out loud. They wish you to believe the old social relations still exist in order to hide the new social relation of cash exchange. This is what Baudrillard calls a second-order simulation. That is, a simulation that hides what is there. This leads to a lot of Eighth Commandment violations. Both Marx and Baudrillard unmask hidden social relations. Marx with regards to the logic of capital and Baudrillard with regards to the logic of technology. Each set of material conditions imposes costs on the user and non-users. In the latter case, we call this an externality. Two problems arise therein. One, unforeseen costs and foreseen costs. Even if the user can foresee some of the costs of using capital or technology, they often expose themselves to unseen costs, which, if not properly accounted for, take them out. Think Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns. While the user can often budget for unforeseen costs, these costs are placed unequally upon non-users who did not consent to bear these costs. This is the engine for revolutions. This is also the ratchet that the right complains about. All of these hidden social relations keep on moving. This knowledge is hidden on purpose by members of the business and technology communities. For example, let us imagine a businessman who takes a lot of business trips out of state. In reality, he's seeing a paramour. Since these persons of direct interest in the secret trysts know little to nothing about the business world, i.e. his wife, children, family members, it is in this man's interest to keep them in the dark. He knows his friends in the business community know, but as they say, what happens downtown stays downtown. We can easily see how externalities abound. In the technological community, the harmful long-term effects of industrial waste byproducts are well known by those who work on site, as they have safety protocols for disposing of the waste. But those communities directly affected by the waste disposal are not told and suffer accordingly. The solution clearly is transparency. Everything is exposed, everything is outlined, and everything is regulated by law. The right doesn't like this kind of talk. If we look more deeply at the immigration issue, the online right is only able to focus on the, quote, social, unquote, costs of immigration, rising ethnic tensions, increasing strain on social services, corollary propaganda that immigrants are good, all of which are actual practical effects of immigration, but these are symptoms, not causes. The typical, quote, causes, quote unquote, are left-wing elites, certain ethnic interests, and ideology. All of these are expressions of how existing institutions and persons take advantage of this labor ecosystem, but does not explain how it came to be. This isn't a part of nature. This isn't something like, an act of God, like a hurricane or an earthquake. There were no stock exchanges on the Scythian steppe. It came to be because industrial and commercial interests seek to reduce the cost of labor by flooding the labor market with labor. Simple supply and demand. If supply of labor goes up, its cost goes down. This could also be represented as workers' bargaining power going down. For example, after the Black Death in England, feudalism ended because the surviving peasants could renegotiate with the landlords to get more freedoms, as the work still needed to be done. A small labor supply means labor is expensive and puts management on the back foot. All of this is the result of a socially constructed economic system to preserve the economic dominance of the bourgeoisie. This disconnect, as seen in 2024, when there was the brouhaha on X over the H-1B visas and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, the right just couldn't figure this one out. There's no controversy. Of course, Elon Musk and Vivek love H-1B visas. They're both tech bros. This takes no effort to understand, but the right just broke on this issue. As a thought experiment, let's say Trump fully implements his deportation and border security policies, and ICE is totally successful. This only resets the stage. The same powers that brought these immigrants in still exist, still own property, still control large swaths of the government. They will bide their time and try again. Two previous efforts to rout these financial forces were Andrew Jackson and his war against the Second Bank of the United States in the 1830s and FDR's New Deal regulations in the 1930s. Each inflicted severe setbacks on the financial elites, but they returned. First, the system of banking dominance was reestablished in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Bank. And the New Deal labor reforms were dismantled over a period of time from the 1980s to the 2010s, such that the 2020s have labor relations as bad as they were in the Gilded Age. The reason why these interests keep returning and retrenching themselves is nobody's willing to call them out. Ironically, the left, right? You're never going to hear a Marxist historian or a leftist historian or a progressive historian talk about Rockefeller, Ford, or Carnegie. They just won't do it. Now, certain elements of the old right, like Anthony Sutton and the John Birch Society would, and that's good. But, both sides are missing bits of the pieces. You need to put the two together. They need to be described, defined, and put under the spotlight. Do this long enough and they become pariahs. I mean, for example, look what happens to the John Birch Society. Everybody thinks they're crackpots and hates them. Why? Because all sorts of, propaganda against them and they're under the spotlight. Okay, you just do that long enough and that happens to most people. On the local level, small businesses are also villains in this immigration game. In many towns in rural America, local and small businesses hire immigrant labor at the expense of local labor for the same reason the larger firms do. This is just good business. The margins are narrow, and the best way to lower costs is reduce the cost of labor. Due to established long traditions and right-wing propaganda that has idolized business owners, it becomes very hard to point this out and call these men to account. This is further compounded by language power games, as described by Foucault, where these businessmen are usually totally deceitful language to describe what they are doing in order to hide what is really going on. Calling them out can be rather hazardous to your success in life, especially your career success. A large part of the online right is to return to the neo-reactionary roots, is to become worthy of assuming the mantle of power. That was big during the intermediate period, the period of crisis. This is a fancy way of saying you're going to schmooze and brown nose your way into the economic hierarchy in order to command some level of wealth and power to get your way. There are many problems with this approach. This shows a fundamental lack of understanding what the logic of capital. The things you hope to do to fight the power, turn back the left, to restore America by entrenching yourself in this system will not be achieved. For once you submit to the logic of capital over time through the cash nexus and the simulation, you turn everything on its head and compels you, in order to preserve what you have, to act in ways that are in fact diametrically opposed to your original goals. I've seen this my entire life, regardless of context. It's just a universal principle in this country. A thing is what a thing does, or so the online right says. Well, unions during their heyday from 1869, the founding of the Knights of Labor, up until the 1960s, before the Culture War, protected the rights of working class Americans from corporations and protected the border from the flood of immigrants we are dealing with now. This cannot be overstated. Samuel Gompers, late 19th, early 20th century president of the AFL, once stated that he and his organization had to actively pressure political leaders to do their job and enforce immigration law. Then, as now, the corporations' bribes led them to turn a blind eye to the situation. This anti-union stance on the right is a legacy of the libertarian roots of the movement. If one were serious about fighting immigration, the first question one would have to ask is, what did the legal and labor landscape of the U.S. look like when immigration was curtailed? After a detailed investigation of history, finding the relevant examples, one must then compare the landscape to our present situation and describe the differences. When that is done, one must create a decision tree on how one might restore the same conditions that once pertained. This will be a step-by-step process that occurs incrementally over years, if not decades, unless you're able to lay hands on the moment of decision history, a rare enough occurrence. This will be a twofold process of one, constructing the necessary structures in order to curtail immigration, and striking at the already existing infrastructure through various means, ranging from direct labor action to reporting on working conditions to enforcing existing labor laws to creating new laws. This level of abstraction and planning is just far beyond the capacity of the online right, and as such, they will continue to fail in their goal of ending the immigration crisis. I need to make this clear. The number one goal that they want is to end the immigration crisis. This is an economic crisis, not a social one, and they got to figure this out. In summary, the online right has gone through three phases: growth, 2007-13, crisis, 2013 to 2020, and then limbo, 2020 to present. The core tenets of neo-reaction, the red pill, and race realism form a baseline of belief for the current online right. The online right is struggling to adapt to a world that is moving beyond their narrow purview of things. They're very blinkered. Grifters and spooks dilute and misdirect energy. The conceptual crisis is the lack of a level of conscious awareness to see problems for what they are. Economic problems, which absolutely have social effects, are seen as merely social issues. The inability to digest the insights of Marx and Baudrillard on how capital and technology hide social relations creates a blinkered view of the world that fails to capture the threat landscape. Using immigration as an example, the online right rejects unionization, the historic bulwark against immigration, and fails to target the true source of this influx of persons into the US, the capitalist class itself. These people don't bring themselves here, especially if they're across the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean. As long as this continues to persist, the online right runs the risk of becoming totally irrelevant or pawns for political actors to cement the structures that are responsible for the immigration flood they bemoan. All right. Wow, 53 views. We have in the chat GF, Neo Disestablishment, Shima Soblain, and Blood-Based. Thank you. We have $9.99 US dollars. Always appreciate the donation. Thank you very much. Shima Soblain, the Commodore Computer Company went out of business sooner than it might have, or as it had a manufacturing site in the Philippines. As one director had a mistress there, this added shipping costs. Oh, that's great. That's great. But to jump off on that, the utter inane stupidity of the libertarian movement is just hard to fathom. Okay, so this is two things I love to do, right? When you get to the beginning of the 21st century, we had in our discourse developing at this time outsourcing. American production was going overseas. It had already begun, but it wasn't really a part of the discourse quite yet, or maybe I was just too young. But that's when I started to engage with it. And I was still, your business conservative free market guy. And I'm like, this is stupid. China's going to take these factories, build ships, build tanks and planes and bombers, and then threaten the United States interests. That is exactly what happened. And you can go back in the day and read all sorts of libertarian arguments. Oh, it's not going to happen. It's just, peaceful people trading. No, it's the Chinese Communist Party. They don't have private enterprise. They see what they do is they have controlling stakes in these businesses. Okay. Some of them are directly state-owned, but then others just have a controlling share, right? So it's not technically state-owned, but they control most of it. And it's like, this is stupid. Why would any country on earth do this? America, the United States used to be the manufacturing hub of the world. Now it's China. That's just so dumb. So again, whose interests were being served? Well, the short-term profits of large mega corporations. And libertarians were just happy to ride that wave. Ryan Young, do you use endnotes? Let's see. It's really good for citations and stuff. I don't know if this is something you need for a published book. Well, I mean, for YouTube presentations, I don't really think I need endnotes. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to make a serious scholarly work, you need to do that. So, yeah, that's the thing. And so what's interesting here is a lot of this is going to be called leftist. But remember, the cash nexus comes from Carlyle, who's a reactionary. I don't know why this is not allowed to be a part of the right-wing discourse. Moldbug was the one who sort of introduced Carlyle into the discourse on the right in the first place, which I think is really interesting. Because obviously Moldbug was a critic of capital. He called economics the dismal science. And then he wrote, about the cash nexus and bemoaned how it undermined all of our social relations. Now, of course, he was just kind of one guy without a movement behind him. And of course, Marx and Engels picked up on that and they kept running with it. But again, that to me is just a historical, it's a contingent historical fact. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be some other way. And again, given Carlyle's reputation on the online right. So actually, you know what? I am going to talk about what the online right can do. Read more Carlyle. Carlyle, that's where you got to pivot. You've got to pivot to this reactionary critique of capital, which since, after Carlyle, a lot of these ideas are developed by Marxists. that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not reactionary ideas. Some people even consider Marx like red Toryism, but that's not necessarily the point of this discussion. The point is, this just has to be done, and I don't know why they can't see it. They just can't see the fact that there is this whole overlay on society, on the world that they live in, where all the signs have been spun around, pointing in arrows on the signs have been spun around, pointing in the wrong direction. And they just have to. I mean, we all know, why is Dilbert funny, right? Dilbert's funny because if you work in cubicle land, then everything is a lie, and you just have to pretend and go along with it. Okay, like we know this. We know this. That's why Dilbert's funny. But then when we get into, we do politics, we pretend that's not the case. And this level of like disconnect between your economic livelihood and politics is crazy. It's like, what? Dude? Samus O'Blaine, visit China. The manufacturing capacity is massive and it's everywhere. So, yeah, it's true. And again, that's just weird, right? The other interesting thing too is that, and I've explored this elsewhere, but it's not really going to go into too deep here. Jack London, famous American author, was also an American socialist. And also, if you want to go the race realist angle, very interested in protecting the, it's called ethnic integrity of the United States from immigration. Right there. Read Jack London. Okay, read Jack London and read Carlyle. This is going to expand your consciousness a little bit. And these are guys that are kind of us-coded, right? And the classic all-adventure American was Jack London, right? I didn't even know he was a socialist until well into my 20s. I was like, wow, I didn't know that. I just thought he was a great writer. So, yeah, that would probably be the best place to start. To learn to think differently, that no, the reason why we have an immigration crisis is large corporations are bringing these people in order to reduce the cost of labor. And that unions historically were our friends. Now, they don't really exist anymore. They've been diluted because of these broader forces. So, let's see. Seamus O'Blaine. Will the West need to import Chinese engineers the way things are going? How would that work in a Cold War situation? Well, it's interesting, right? With AI and automation, there might not be, except for a handful of like prompt engineers at the top and maintenance engineers, there may not be that much need for engineers. You just have AI programs doing it all. So that may not be as big a problem as you think. Now, of course, that's not going to allow for the same amount of innovation we're accustomed to, because that's the result of people, not machines, and machines don't really innovate. They just respond to what people tell them to do. And then I suppose then if I'm right about this, in a Cold War situation, it won't be quite as bad as you might think. Because ultimately, that's the other shoe that's going to fall, right? Even if Trump and ICE beat the immigrants, you still have automation and AI to worry about. And arguably, that's even more dangerous because it's something that is just not responsive. I mean, what do you do, right? You can arrest an immigrant and then send them back to their place of origin, okay? That's not, I mean, that's still a problem for the working class to deal with, but you can solve it, right? If everything is AI controlled and you have these AI algorithms writing code for the next, I don't know, government program, and there's a handful of AI prompt engineers at the top, well, you just, now we're dependent on it, right? Now we're back in Uncle Ted's trap where you can't unplug from the machine because you'll kill yourself. Not great. Not great either. All right, guys, that's a lot to think about. Hope that was informative and interesting. This is Todd Lewis, the Praise of Fly podcast, signing off.